As I said, I'm in my 22nd year as the clerk of courts here in Schuylkill County. I've also spent the last 17 years as the legislative director of the State Association of Pathonetaries and Clerks of Courts in Pennsylvania, and since 1995 I've been a member of the State Association of Elected County Officials, serving 3 years as president of that association, and since 2003 I'm the chairman of the executive board of that association. And that association meets in Harrisburg monthly except for the summer months, and our job is to go over legislation that affects all offices in county government, from commissioners down to auditors. And we discuss legislation, we support legislation that will help county officials, we oppose legislation we believe will hurt county officials, and we also meet with the local government commission senators and representatives on a quarterly basis.
Okay. Well, we'll move on then to the first question, which is from Dan.
I mean, as you're well aware, Senator Rose had expertise in the education field. So I wanted to ask how you plan to make up for both the lack of seniority, as in his chairmanship of the Education Committee, as well as his expertise in general on education issues.
Well, I've been studying the education issues as much as possible, and one of the things I've asked for from the Democrats in the caucus in the Senate is for a seat on the Education Committee if I am elected. I feel very strongly about education. I know how important my education was to me. Senator Rhodes, being an educator, had a leg up on everyone when it came to that. He did an outstanding job on the Education Committee. But I have been studying the different issues that are involved with education, and my plan is to become as knowledgeable as I possibly can, ensure that we have the funding that is necessary for the school districts to carry on this education.
Right.
And so my plan is to, study the issue as thoroughly as possible. Granted, no one will be able to take Senator Rhodes' place at that level.
Right.
But I'm going to do the very best I can to become as knowledgeable as I can in all those issues,
Right.
and hopefully gain a seat on the Education Committee.
You kind of touched on that, but are you concerned at all that no matter what you do on the Education Committee, you'll always be measured against what he did?
Naturally you will.
Yeah.
The Senator left extremely big shoes to fill, and I don't think anybody can really fill them.
Yeah.
But I will do the very best I can, and I will always approach those things from the basis of my campaign is from a common sense approach. We need to take a look at issues and determine them based on common sense. What is good for everyone, not just for a small segment of any particular group.
Continuing with education, do you favor the consolidation of school districts plan as outlined by the governor?
Well, the governor's program, as near as I can tell, talks about forming a commission to examine the possibility of eliminating up to 400 school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm not in favor of that. I'm probably not even in favor of forming the commission, because commissions cost money, right? And I just don't understand how you can possibly eliminate 400 school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and still provide the proper education that's necessary for the students to become the best and the brightest of tomorrow. And I'm not just talking about sports. We've heard the people say, well, how are you going to have 400 boys on a football team? Nobody's going to get to play.
Right.
But I'm more concerned about the students who are also learning, about the educational quality, the size of the classroom. I just don't see it as a practical matter. And there are so many different variables involved, such as transportation. How are you going to get all these students from wherever they might live to a central school, if that's what this plan would call for? I don't know exactly why the governor was thinking about consolidating these school districts. I believe that, as has happened in the past, if school districts nearby see their census dropping, see their populations in their area dropping, and they feel that maybe it's time for them to merge, they're the best ones to make that determination, not some commission appointed by the governor.
Right. And that led into my next question, which is what do you think about the composition of the commission, which is made up of 6 state senators and 6 state representatives? If this commission is formed, if there was a setup of the commission with more local control, would you be more prone to maybe vote for that commission?
I would absolutely want to see local involvement in any commission, because of what will happen if any consolidation takes place, then those at the local level. It's fine to put senators and representatives on a commission, but we need to have local people involved. We need to have community leaders in the school and in education involved in this, if it's going to have any merit whatsoever.
And since this will be made up as it's composed right now of 6 state senators and 6 state representatives, if elected, is this commission you might serve on, or what kind of things do you think, if it goes the way that Governor Rendell's proposed, what kind of factors should this commission look at if they do this year-long study? What kind of things should they look at to make
Well,
this
if
decision?
the commission is going to go ahead, and I'm not sure if it will or
Right.
it won't, but if it does, I would think that they would probably pick senators and representatives from the Education Committee that have a lot more experience than I do.
Right.
But I would certainly have input with those senators expressing my views on exactly what I thought was relevant to the commission study. That would be the most important thing to me. I don't know if I'd be able to gain a seat on that commission, being a freshman senator, but I would certainly have as much input as possible with those senators, letting them know exactly how I felt about it. And again, stressing that they need to open the door and bring the local education people into the mix in order to get a good read on what's going to happen here. And if it takes longer than a year, so be it. We shouldn't just rush to judgment on this. We studied for a year, and then what do we have? Something that may or may not work. We need to be very careful about how this may or may not be done. Because, again, children's education, they're at stake here. We can't afford to make a mistake in this. And I just cannot see how we can eliminate 400 school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm not even sure how much money it's going to save. And that would be a big factor, and maybe that's why the governor even proposed it. But on that basis and on the face of it, I'm not particularly in favor of eliminating 400 school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Right. One more question on education, moving away from the consolidation. What would you do to see that education in Schuylkill County is more tailored towards preparing graduates for today's job market?
Well, I think we need to make sure, first of all, that we fund the school districts to the degree that's necessary for them to operate. Prior to 1983, school districts in Pennsylvania received funding from the Commonwealth that equaled to about 50% of what it took to operate. Over the years, that's dropped down to about 32%. Now, a year or so ago, in one of Governor Rendell's most recent budgets, that was increased to about 36-37%. It's a step in the right direction. But I think if we get back to the funding scheme of where they are funded to about 50% of what they need, that will allow the school boards to make sure that the programs are in place to give the students the best possible education. Right now, school boards, I believe, have to weigh everything against the tax dollars and the property tax dollars that they have to bring in and potentially have to raise. And so I think if they received the funding that was necessary, they would make sure that they would then be able to have the programs in place to make sure that our students get the best education possible. It is a matter of dollars and cents. There's no two ways about it. But if we don't fund them to the degree that is necessary for them to do their job, it makes it more difficult for them to provide the education that is necessary to make sure that our students are trained, and not just to go to college, but we need plumbers and we need electricians, and we need all sorts of other trades work as well. And we have to make sure that we tailor our programs in our schools, whether it's in high school or in trade school or in college, to make sure that we are giving the best possible education to these students to proceed into whatever profession they decide they want to get into. So it is a matter of dollars and cents as far as I'm concerned, but we also have to make sure that the school districts are providing the programs that are necessary to make sure that these students get the education to do the job that they choose that they want to do.
All right, now let's go from the classroom to the legislative chambers. What do you think of the expense of our state legislature, and what can be done to reduce it? Perhaps you read the three-part series we ran the other week in our paper.
Yeah, I've read that, and I've read other reports about the cost of the legislature here in Pennsylvania. And I know there's been legislation introduced in the past to reduce the size of the legislature. Of course, I don't see that that's ever going to, get a vote in the legislature. It's like, you're voting to put yourself out of a job. But one of the things that I think we need to do is to control the cost. I think we should eliminate the COLAs altogether for the legislators. I mean, I'm running for a job. I'm running to do a job. I'm not running for a job. I'm not running because I know I'm going to get X amount of dollars more each year. I'd be perfectly happy to take whatever the salary is and leave it at that. I have no problem with that. And we need to be careful how we check the expenditures here that the legislature is using. The legislature is costing us hundreds of millions of dollars each year. I don't think we have to do that. I have to take a look at exactly what each legislator is entitled to. But one of the things I think we can eliminate is the COLA. that should be just taken away. There's no need for it. Now I see earlier on in the year when it looked like it was going to be a bad budget year before the stimulus package came along and the $6 billion was dropped into the state's lap, the legislators said, well, we're going to pass on our COLA for this year. I think they should pass on the COLA every year. I think it should just be removed. And as far as the size of the legislature, I know that we're the second largest in the United States. Right? Perhaps that's something that could be looked at, but again, I don't know how much support you'd have for changing the size of the legislature in Pennsylvania. But we certainly have to do everything we can to get a grasp on what's being spent to operate the legislature, keep that in control, and try to reduce it as best as possible.
Just to be clear, Steve, we'll follow up on that. Just to be clear, Steve, so if you were elected, you would support legislation that overturned the automatic COLAs every year?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
As far as the support for change, the constitutional change requires support, but also leadership. So I'll ask you a few questions about what sort of things you would be in favor of as a leader, should you be elected. What do you think of a part-time legislature, as some states have?
Well, the legislature's not in session that often, and some people would say they're part-time already. That's something that you need to take a look at. However, I have to caution you, a part-time legislature in today's world might not be the best idea. There are issues that come up in a hurry that need to be addressed in a hurry. And part-time legislature may end up costing you more in the long run than the full-time legislature does. So I'd have to take a look at that, and you want to be careful about that. Perhaps it's time to actually go ahead and have a constitutional convention.
That was in my list of questions.
Yes, to have a constitutional convention and have them take a look at the structure of government and see what recommendations they can make, and discuss ways that we might be able to cut down on the cost of running our government. I believe there's a certain amount of waste in Harrisburg. And one of the things that I proposed in part of my campaign is that I saw the governor in his budget had a list of programs on the block that, take a look at this and take a look at that. Maybe we'll eliminate this, eliminate that. I think one of the jobs of a legislator, whether you be a senator or a representative, is to look at every program that's being funded by the state. And is it working? And if it is, that's fine. And if it needs a little more money, that's fine. If it's not working, why are we throwing good money after bad? So we need to do that, and that's another way to help reduce the cost of the government. But again, we have to look at what the legislators get. Is it sufficient? Maybe it's overcompensation for what we need, and we need to take a look at those items and see if they can't be reduced as well in order to cut down the cost of what it costs for the legislature itself.
Two other things in this. We referred before to reducing the number of people in the legislature and expressed skepticism over there being support for that. Would you support reducing the number of legislators? Or before you answer that, let me throw another. People think I'm nuts for asking this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. One of the states in our union, Nebraska, eliminated one of its chambers and has only one chamber. I was wondering if maybe in Pennsylvania, if we got rid of one of the chambers, we could keep, supposing we got rid of the Senate, which is the opposite of what they did in Nebraska, we could keep the House of Representatives with, how many is it,
203.
203,
Right.
as opposed to saying, let's reduce the House of Representatives to 100 and still keep the Senate. What's your idea about, on both those things, one chamber and reducing the number of legislators?
Well, again, I'm not so sure that one chamber is the answer. I mean, the government was set up the way it was set up so that there would be representation from a small area, which is what the House of Representatives has, and from a larger area, which is what a state senatorial district is. And so I think you are able to bring more ideas together. If you were coming from two different areas, from a local area perhaps, and then from a larger multi-county area, as to what the needs are for the Commonwealth and for those people that live in those districts. As far as, what was the other part of your question?
Well, what I was saying is reducing the number of people in either house, or cutting back the number. What was the number that came up?
Yeah,
in
your
the
opponent
day's
said that
discussion?
he's in favor of legislation that would lop off, I think, 10 seats every 10
10
years.
years,
Gradual.
So you've got
Gradual
down to
plan.
about 140, 150.
Would that sort of short circuit the whole idea of one house represents a small area and the other house represents a large area? Would you favor that?
Again, I'd have to take a look at it, because you start to reach a point where your area is so large that you can't have the contact you need with your constituents. That makes it more difficult. And in an area such as this, if I have 250,000 people in a senatorial district, that is a a large area, but it's manageable, and you can get to talk to those people and listen to their. If you end up with a district that has 500,000 people in it, that makes your job that much more difficult. Not that it's not doable, but it makes it more difficult for your constituents to also have reach out to you and talk to you and tell you what they need. You'd end up with God knows how many district offices that would cost that much more money. The idea of reducing the legislature is a good idea, but again, it depends to what level and to how it's going to affect the constituents. What we don't want to have is a government that's out of touch with the constituents entirely. And that's what I'm afraid you'd have if you get too far down the line in reducing the size of the legislature. Does it need to be reduced? I think it probably does. I mean, we're talking about the second largest one in the United States. I think it's time that we take a look at that and see what we can do about going down to a lower number. But again, we have to be careful as to how low do we go. We don't short circuit this and have people out there that feel as though they have no contact or they are not represented by their senator.
Ben?
Yeah, Steve, I wanted to get your opinion on the Boscom's loan guarantee. Your colleagues, the commissioners of the courthouse, voted unanimously, Republican and Democrat, to back the loan from the state. Your opponent opposes it on largely a philosophical basis, that he says you can't save all the stores that go under, so you shouldn't pick and choose. What's your take on that? Would you have supported it if you were in the legislature?
Well, I would have supported it because it still has to do with jobs in our area. And we've lost enough jobs in this area. My opponent can say what he wants about the number of jobs that have been created. But if that were the case and they were all still here, why would our unemployment rate be at 8% in this county right now? And since it, technically it has nothing to do with county taxpayers' money.
Right.
It was, funneled from the state through the county over to the store. That's part of why we're talking about stimulus packages in Washington. And last year you had President Bush supporting stimulus packages. This year it's President Obama. But the idea is to try and save jobs, to try and help people hold on to their jobs so that they continue to put food on their table and pay their bills.
Yeah.
And some people say, well, it's okay, let them all fail. Well, that's fine. And you can say, well, the people that brought this mess on are the people that suffer. But they're not the only ones that suffer. There are other people that suffer as well. It's the people that are working there.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important. Philosophically, I didn't think there was anything wrong with it because it saved a number of jobs and it helped save the corporation, which has a number of stores opened throughout this area. And so I think something that had to be done. I didn't see a problem with it. The commissioners didn't see a problem with it, whether they were Democrat or Republican. They all voted for it.
Right.
Because it was to try and save people's jobs.
Right.
Granted, you can't save the world.
Right.
Right. But in this particular case, since it didn't affect our county taxpayers, it didn't affect the taxpayers of the 29th district, I didn't see anything wrong with it.
You kind of touched on follow-up there, we can't save the world. So then what do you say to people who ask, well, why didn't the state step in and save Stephen Barry's when it closed in the Schuylkill Mall? Why is it Boscom's?
Well, that I don't know, and I think it was, you probably have to ask the governor. I think this was his proposal, and I don't know how they pick and choose, but it's something that needs to be taken a look at, because I believe more has to be done to save as many businesses as possible right now in this bad economic time. I'm not in favor of just throwing money at big corporations and at the companies that have caused the problems that are occurring in the economy. But locally, I support anything that can be done to help our businesses to remain in place. Because in a year or two, this economic downturn will pass if we use our heads and we're careful about how we invest the stimulus money and where we put it. But I think it will pass. Economy is cyclical. We all know that. But we have to be careful, because the money that's coming in now to help these businesses is a one-time deal. I mean, the economy may stay down for 2 or 3 years, but I can't imagine the Congress passing another $800 billion stimulus package, which I don't think was done entirely in the correct way. But that money's not always going to be there, so we have to be careful how it's done. Why the governor picked one over the other, I don't know. I couldn't tell you whether that was a good idea or a bad idea. I don't know what the reasoning was for it. If I saw the reasoning, perhaps I could better address that issue.
To change gears a little bit, I want to talk about third-party ballot access here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Do you think third-party candidates have just access to the ballot? And if not, what could be changed to make it easier for them, if you think it should be easier for them?
Well, I think anyone has the right to run for any office. And, I know our rules are kind of tight about, having a certain percentage of the vote in order to qualify as a
Right.
third party or an independent party or whatever it is. But, you know, if you don't qualify that way, I think there should be a procedure in place where you take a petition and circulate your petition and get on the ballot that way as an independent or nonpartisan. If, you know, the Department of State Bureau of Elections Commission's legislation, maybe we have to take a look at their rules and see whether or not we've made it accessible to anyone who desires to be a candidate to be able to run for office.
Right.
I don't necessarily think that anyone who's a member of either major party should have a monopoly on whether or not they get to run.
Right.
We need to hear the voice of everyone because there are a larger and larger number of independents and nonpartisans and other party registrants in the counties in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Right.
And so we don't want to shut their voice off as well.
All right. Changing gears once again, turning to the state's new updated right to know and open records law. A little bit of background leading into this question. The Office of Open Records sets the rates for photocopies of documents for Commonwealth and local agencies, and their recommended maximum cap, or actually their maximum cap is 25 cents, I should say. They recommend that legislative and judiciary agencies follow that rate for uniformity, but the legislature and judicial agencies can set their own rates. This leads into our question. Recently, we wanted to get a copy of a criminal complaint from a local district office. We were asked to pay 50 cents per sheet, which is twice the recommended rate by the Office of Open Records, and also much higher than a for-profit company like, say, Staples would charge. So our question is, I mean, what do you think about that? Is that in the spirit of a law that's supposed to make government more accessible and more transparent? Is there any kind of a problem with that? Or?
Well, I can tell you that in the Clerk of Court's office, we are at a quarter a copy. And we were at a quarter a copy long before the Open Records law was changed to set that fee at 25 cents a copy. And I believe 25 cents a copy is a reasonable fee. That's why we've always maintained that in our office for a number of years. It was never cost anybody more than a quarter a copy. And I know that the judicial agencies can do whatever they feel is necessary, but I always thought 25 cents was a reasonable fee for a copy. It covered the cost of the paper, the cost of operating the machine, and the cost of the person who was making the copy. So I always thought 25 cents was good. And even in my state association, when we would discuss this among pathonetaries and clerks of courts, I always suggested that they should look at 25 cents a copy as a good, reasonable fee, so that we have people be able to access what they need to get without paying a large amount of money.
And as the legislature, also legislative agencies can set their own fees. Would you ever vote to let a legislative agency exceed that 25 cent cap?
No, 25 cents should be enough.
I believe I have the last question. This is I'm sure, are confident that you're going to win. I was wondering if you might be able to tell us what will happen to fill the vacancy created in the Clerk of Courts, and do you have a successor in mind, perhaps, that you would support?
Well, under the county code, what happens is if I should be successful on March 3rd, of course, you know, there's a procedure of certifying the vote and, you know, whatever else has to take place. And so sometime in late March, I believe, I would be leaving the Clerk of Court's office and taking the oath of office as a state senator. Under the county code, the first deputy is the acting Clerk of Courts until his successor or her successor, if it's a female first deputy, until his or her successor is designated. That can be done in one of two ways. It can be done, first of all, by gubernatorial appointment, but more likely it can be done in this November's election, because the fact that I would be leaving before a certain date in August means that this seat will be filled in a 2-year term election in the regular November election. And so someone would be running from each party for a 2-year term for Clerk of Courts until the end of 2011.
Would there be a chance to get that in, to have a primary then? If that were
Well,
done?
that's the question, and I'm thinking probably not, and I'll tell you why. The date to file petitions for the primary is March the 10th. Even though this election is March the 3rd, it usually takes about 10 days to certify the election until they do the canvassing and they do the reconciliation of the vote. And so that would be past the deadline to file a petition. So it may very well be where each party would have to pick a candidate to be on the ballot in November for the 2-year term. Unless the Department of State would change and say, well, because this has happened on this particular date, because it was so close to the deadline for filing a petition, who knows what they might say. Perhaps they may open up a special window for filing petitions for the primary. But that's cutting it awful close, because you have a certain amount of time to file your petition, After that, you have a certain amount of time to withdraw your name if you've already filed a petition, or you choose not to be on the ballot for the May primary. So I don't know how that would work, but my best guess is that since it's after March 10th, each side would have to nominate an individual whose name would appear on the ballot in November for a 2-year term. So there would be no special election for clerk of courts, if that's what you were...
If the governor appointed someone, would that person serve only till November then?
Well, actually, it would serve until the first Monday in January, because that's how the term
Oh,
would go.
okay. But there would be an election in
Right.
November.
But there would still be an election in November for a 2-year term. It would fall on the same day. It would be part of the regular municipal election
Right.
in November.
Who would decide if the governor's going to appoint someone, or if he would just keep the deputy as the acting clerk until November? Who would decide that?
Well, that's up to the governor.
The governor
If he had
decides that.
if he had
Okay.
a name that he wanted to submit for approval, to nominate a name for approval, that would be up to him. The party may very well send names over, both parties may send names over for a nomination to the governor's office, but it would be up to the governor as to whether he would send a name over or he would leave the first deputy in charge until the municipal election in November. But again, there would be no special election for the clerk of
Okay.
court seat.
And if,
Let me see.
if I can
Go
go back,
ahead.
you said if you were elected, then in the meantime, you said the first deputy clerk of courts. What's that person's title?
Yes.
First
The
deputy,
first deputy clerk of courts
And-
is the acting clerk of
Okay.
courts.
And who's the current first deputy clerk?
Paul Stefanik.
Okay.
Okay, that's all the questions that we put together. Would you like to make a closing statement?
Well, yes, I just wanted to, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I want you to know that in this campaign, as I said before, I intend to approach this job, if I'm elected as your state senator, using my common sense in everyday fashion, so that every piece of legislation, every issue that comes before me, I would want to take a look at that, read it, and try to understand how it's going to affect everyone, and make a decision based on how it will affect everyone, not just one particular group as opposed to another. I am very interested in education. I'm very interested in providing affordable health care to the citizens of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm particularly interested in making sure that we continue down the road of true property tax relief. We've been hearing about it for 22 years or 28 years or whatever it might be. And while there's been some property tax relief, the ultimate goal that was established a few years ago when this all came about with the casino legislation still hasn't been achieved. And I think we need to carry through with that to make sure that we have property tax relief for our property tax payers, but that we also have money to support education to the degree that is necessary to make sure our children get the best education possible.
Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't support abolishing the property tax system altogether?
Well, there's some talk about doing that, and I would have to take a good look at that, because you'd have to make sure you have a funding source in place to cover all of those dollars that you'd be losing from the elimination of the property tax. You're talking about school property tax or property tax entirely, which means municipal and county tax as well.
I think the plans that were proposed were just for the school
Yeah,
property
school,
tax.
that's a different issue. School property taxes, that's possible to eliminate them entirely. But I have people say, well, we want to eliminate property taxes altogether at all levels. I'm not sure you're going to be able to do that.
Right.
Because again, you'd have to have such a dedicated funding source in place to carry that off or to pull that off. That may be very hard to do. And if you try to do that and you end up in an economic downturn like this, you may very well find municipalities and counties really strapped, a lot worse than they are right now.
Right.
But school property taxes, that's a different story. That I think we can eliminate entirely, but not property taxes altogether.
I mean, the most common answer I've heard is increase the sales tax by 100%.
Well-
I mean, as you said, in economic times like this, you might find that that's not going to work.
That's not going to work. I really believe that we need to wait to see how the casino revenue comes in. Understand, I think the proposal that was passed called for 14 casinos. 6 of them are open. One of the largest ones in Pittsburgh is under roof, but is not opened yet. Bethlehem is about to open. Right? If the first 6 that are opened generated $500, $600, $700 million in revenue, we can only imagine what the 14 will generate when they're all up and running. And again, while sales tax revenues have been down in the last year or so because of the economic downturn, the reports I've seen from Harrisburg show that the casino revenue is up. And so that may be a more viable source of revenue to help us, especially in bad economic times. So I'd rather wait and see how is this revenue coming in, what is the total amount, and then go from there to eliminate the property tax or to reduce it as much as possible, and then take a look at what other funding source we might have to eliminate it altogether.
Sorry to redirect you in your final statement. That we were going to touch on that in question number 2. That's sloppiness on our part.
No, that's okay.
Is there anything else?
Well, no, but again, I'm very interested in making sure that we continue down the road of the property tax relief that was promised a few years ago in that legislation. Also want to make sure that we continue to do the best we can to create jobs, and I would like to do that especially in the renewable energy field. I very strongly about the wind farm and solar energy, but there are other sources that we can use. I still think we need to take another look at how we can work with coal, because that's the one source of energy we have in this county that's so plentiful, but we have to do it in a way that's as environmentally friendly as possible. So I think there's growing technology out there that will allow us to take a look at that and see how we can help turn that to our advantage to help create even more jobs in this county. Unfortunately, the population of the county is decreasing. I think when the census comes out next year, we're going to be surprised, maybe not surprised, but we're going to be a little dismayed to find out that we've gone below 150,000 people, or what the threshold is for a fourth-class county. And that can have certain ramifications. And so we need to try and make sure we create as many new jobs as possible, but family-sustaining jobs, so that we can keep our young people here instead of having them move away.
Would there be any major changes if we weren't a fourth-class county anymore?
Well, fifth-class county, it can affect some grants and some funding. There are some ramifications that are involved in moving from a fourth class to a fifth class. And I can tell you that back in 2000, one of the ways to avoid that, and they did it in 2000, was one of the counties out west had dropped below a certain level, and they were going to lose their status. And what the legislature did was to change the scheme as to what population it was designated for a certain class county, to make sure that they didn't fall out of that class county. So there are ways to take care of that if you wanted to do that.
Is Carbon a fifth-class county?
Carbon, I believe, is a sixth-class county.
Sixth class. How far does it go?
It goes down to eighth.
Eighth.
Oh.
Yeah, first to eighth class counties.
There's only two first-class.
There's only one.
Only one.
Philadelphia is the only
Philadelphia.
first-class county. Then there's 2 and 2A after that. There's Allegheny County, Chester, Montgomery, Bucks. Those are 2 and 2A.
Yeah.
But the majority of the counties are 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th class counties by far. And I would only know that because of my involvement with my state association.
Right.
I know every prothonotary and every clerk in every county in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we're keenly aware of their problems as well.